Strap yourselves in and hold on tight. This is the Power Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and it's September, which means it's back to school or back to teaching, depending on where you live. And it's the official kickoff of ski season, or at least it's when ski shops want you to start thinking about ski and snowboard season. The Labor Day sale has always been a big deal, and it's the unofficial end of summer. I'm sure there were a shit ton of deals to be had, but the big question out there is what is going to actually happen to ski season? Science has been right time and time again with this virus, and those science guys, well, they have been saying that it could get bad again. But we're more prepared now than we ever have been before. I mean, we really didn't know anything when ski season was canceled last year. When this whole thing started, I didn't want to leave the house. I was washing groceries and doing crazy shit now that I think about it, but it was all about minimizing risk for the greater good. Over the past 6 months, things have changed so much in the world. It's like no one even mentions the greater good when they talk about masks anymore. It's all about politics. And while I've loosened up for sure, I still play things on the safe side compared to most people I know. But science says this shit will be back. And I'm sure everyone who skis or snowboards has had the conversation with a buddy about what's going to happen to the season. I've been saying since spring that there will be a ski season, but it'll be totally different than anything we know. My thought has been that the places that have already planned their lift lines, the ones that started in July and August laying markers and figuring out where people are going to need to know when they line up in the lift corral, well, those are the ones that are going to be successful. Because that's what's going to matter most when it comes to in-person people managing. The online people managing aspect, the reservation systems, the staggered starts, the constant social communication, the up-to-the-minute traffic and line updates, and other mountain issues, they will be a work in progress too. And even if a mountain has all of that dialed, what happens when an employee or just a person who is on the hill tests positive? Is there a temporary shutdown? Does contract tracing tell that story? Who knows what's going to happen? I believe resort skiers will all ski less this winter, and it won't be as convenient all around. It will be a world where mom and pop resorts are best equipped to handle this. I think of where I go, the summit at Snoqualmie. If they can limit the people with a reservation system, or however they plan on doing that, then they shut the lodges, shut down all the gathering areas, and create rows of porta potties. As long as they have their lift line situation figured out, I feel like it can work and they can stay in business. But for destination resorts, they are kind of screwed. Vail has released their plan, which I read some of, and it's awesome that they have a plan and that plan seems to favor employees. But the scary thing for the big guys is regardless of what they plan, they need to convince people to get on a plane, then stay in a hotel, eat at restaurants, and do shit that people haven't been doing for the past 6 months. I mean, maybe you'll get people who live in places that don't have mountains, the Floridians and the Texans, but it is going to be a tough sell. Speaking of tough sells, my guest this week has more than 40 years of sales under his belt. Marty Carrigan is a sales rep that everyone knows and loves. In his early days, Party Marty spent time traveling the world for Hart Skis and then on to Morrow Snowboards, and from there, he's reinventing the whole sales repping thing. Marty has so much history behind the curtain, and he talks a lot, and it's great. But before we get into it, I want to ask you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to it. Follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. I'm close to that 10,000 followers I need for the swipe up feature, so please follow me if you aren't already. If you have any feedback or questions for me, my email is mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I will get back to you. I also want to ask you to continue to support my amazing sponsors. They are Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to global sales guy, Marty Carrigan. So I guess I'll start it out with, this is an interesting podcast. I've been working with a guy named Tom Moreno, and he was a longtime internet retail guy who left his cush job for a startup that focused on travel and renting gear at your destination. So you can imagine Tom's gear is pretty much canceled with what's going on in the world. But Tom decided to help me out with some podcast stuff while he's looking for work. And he said that you would be a great potential sponsor of my podcast.
You know, Tom and I stay in great contact. We worked with each other very closely, and we had a really fun run building Black Crows together over the last 5 years, before Tom left for a Waco.
Yep.
So Tom and I then got to spend a lot of time together personally and professionally. And most important, we got a lot of time on the snow together. And I'd reached out to Tom about your podcast and what sponsorship looked like at that. That was my initial call. And then Tom was like, you need to be on the podcast. And I'm like, oh, whatever. I think it's mostly athletes. And he said, no, they do business guys too.
When Tom had brought you up as a potential sponsor, I had told him in doing a little bit of digging about you, because your name has come up in the podcast here and there. And I was like, actually, Tom, I didn't think it was, for the brands that you're working with, it probably wasn't the right fit in terms of sponsorship. But in what you've done in your life and times, it's like, we've got to tell Marty's story because it's more than just a sales rep. So that's kind of how we got here. So it's like, hey, I don't want to take your money, even though that's something that I love to do, but I just wanted your time for the podcast. And I'll preface the whole interview with some things I've heard about you, is that you are the funnest guy ever, and it's always one speed with you. It's nothing or full throttle. That's what you get when you work with you. And you don't give a fuck what anybody thinks about you. You just do your thing, and that's how it goes. Is that a fair assessment of how you do things?
God, Mike, yes, it's flattering. And I guess I can tell you a little story. Sean Palmer, I had the pleasure to work for Palmer Snowboards for, 7, 8+ years, and kind of in the middle of my 35-year career so far. And Sean taught me, he's like, Marty, moderation sucks. And that's always stuck with me, in just the work ethic I was brought up with, values that my parents taught me, and if you're going to do something, you got to do it 100% and fully commit. And Sean lived that in his life. So for me, looking back on the last 35 years, it feels like a second ago, I was 20 again, and where the time went, I have no idea, but what an incredible experience. And going back and looking at it, it was really all about the people and the journey that you meet along the way, and how every chapter of my career is building on previous chapters. I mean, how lucky have I been to make a career out of what I love? We always joke, we are the consumer. I live in Steamboat Springs. We have an office and showroom in Denver. But even with my team in Denver, I've watched so many people in the ski and snowboard business not ski or snowboard anymore, right? And so we ski every Wednesday morning and snowboard every Wednesday morning as a team. I buy everybody a pass on my team. We're on the hill every chance we get. We are the consumer. So we're constantly looking for products that excite the consumer, because if we sell it to retailers and the retailers don't sell it to consumers, nobody wins, right? And so the fun part of my career is it's been fun from day one, and it continues to be, just because of the people, right? We spend more time with the people we work with than we spend with our family sometimes. And it really has been a journey. It's been a global journey, that started in ski and morphed into snowboard. And I never could think, going backwards 35 years, that all those people that I've met along the way are still part of my life.
Yeah, I can imagine your network has grown to be huge, and we're going to talk about that. But first, in thinking that you really don't give a fuck about what people think about you, it reminds me of your most recent challenge that I've seen press releases lately. I wouldn't consider yourself a douchebag. Some people consider me that. But your Global Sales Guys group has taken on the Douchebag name as a brand that you're representing here in the States, and I believe it's going to be rebranded as DB. But was there any concern for you when you're picking up a great product line with a horrible name and you're going to sell it here in the US, and you're pretty much saying, I'm a nerd with the product name?
Great question. We've been following that brand for a long time, and we've watched it from the sidelines, and we went into it eyes wide open, knowing what the challenges are. To your question, we're not afraid of tongue in cheek, but to make the brand a commercially viable brand and not a niche brand, which is what it deserves, because the products are insane.
They compete with like the Kind in Europe and people like that.
Yeah. And one, it's all about the product, right? And the design and the functionality, and what Truls has done, and Yol and the founders. It's amazing what they've created. I think the Douchebags name also kind of brought it into the market in a very like loud way. But it's an evolution, like anything. As they're maturing as a company and as a brand, more and more of the products just feature the DB branding, not the douchebag branding. And that's the evolution you're going to see over the next 6, 12, 18 months on a global basis. Is DB is really the emerging brand.
So they're going to kill douchebag in Europe too? So like the website and everything will be gone?
Yeah, DB, they're going through a rebranding right now, and that'll be kind of released over the next few months and next 12 months. But yes, it's a global rebranding. And we're not part of that whole process. We're the sales team for the US, but we're incredibly excited about the opportunity. There's a great base of early adopter retailers that started with the brand here in the US. One of the things that excited us the most, Mike, about it was our first initiative that we're selling right now is a specialty retail only drop. So think of it like your Nike drop or Adidas drop or special shoe drops. This is a yellow version brand that's endorsed by a couple of the athletes that is only going to be available in specialty retail in October, and it won't be available online. So you have to buy it in the store. So it's super exciting to see a company really in the whole omni-channel world right now, really putting an olive branch out there to specialty retail.
And drive people there?
Yeah, and saying, hey, your business is important to us. And it is. The specialty retailer drives everything, Mike. And the specialty retailer is who builds brands. And so that's why our whole company, we have one basic fundamental. It's specialty products for specialty shops is not a tagline for us. It's how we run our business. And it's really paramount in where the future is going as well, because everybody's going Amazon and everyone's going D2C. And, what's the role of the specialty retailer? And for me, the role of the specialty retailer has never been more important because the specialty retailer is still that touch point.
Yeah.
And so it took me 35 years, or I should say 33 years to define this, was what is our why? Why does Global Sales Guys exist? Why does our team exist? And we're real big on the why with the brands we represent. And our why is we have the privilege to travel around the world. Not recently, but
Yeah.
we have the privilege the last 30 years to travel around the world and meet with specialty retailers wherever we go, right? Wherever we go, we meet with the best specialty retailers, whether that's Japan or France or Australia or Switzerland or Austria or Germany. And we meet with those iconic specialty retailers and they feed us the trends and brands they see in their geographic markets. And even though our company's called Global Sales Guys, we're really just a connector. We're connecting brands that are really cool in France and working for great retailers in France, like a Zero G in Chamonix or a Chanel Sports or Snow Leader, and bringing those brands back to retailers in North America.
Do you help with any of the marketing in North America as well and kind of giving them direction? Because it seems like with what you're doing, you're finding these brands, you're bringing them over here and showing them to the marketplace here. And are you helping them actually spread the word in the US, doing everything but being a distributor pretty much?
Yes and no. Yes means we execute for the brands. So any initiatives the brands have in US or North America, myself and my team are here to help them execute that.
They send you the toolbox and you work with it?
They'll send toolbox, they'll send people. We connect them with the right agencies here in the US. We connect them with PR agencies, marketing agencies, industry leaders, ambassadors, so on and so forth. But our primary role and function is brand creation and sales. And really, we're more like sales architects. So we tell everybody in the beginning of the process, it's not how much you sell, it's who you sell it to. And that's what I mean by specialty retailers build brands.
Black Crows would be the perfect example of getting it on the right people's feet.
We started with 5 stores the first year. Very Chamonix-esque, Jackson Hole, Telluride. And then we went to 25. And then we went to 50. And then we went to 100. And so we're very disciplined in how we sell a brand into the market. We work with the early adopters who like to be first, and we kind of build it step by step from there. But the marketing all comes from the brands. their why, their stories. We're very integrated in it.
You deploy it.
We deploy. Yeah, we deploy. And our business model is kind of unique. People don't really know what we do. I kind of like that a little bit.
Because you're bigger than your typical rep group. I mean, your employee base, you have like 10 people?
Yes. So I've had my company, Mike, 22 years. I don't know where you wanted to start.
We were going to do this at the end, but we're going to talk about Global Sales Guys now, and we're going to jump into your life after we get done talking about it.
That sounds great. Yeah. So Global Sales Guys, the company's called Sales Guys. My wife and I started 22 years ago, in 1998. We moved back from Oregon, and I was at that time the VP of Global Sales and Marketing for Morrow Snowboards.
Yep.
And it was purely a lifestyle decision to move back to Steamboat Springs, Colorado. We wanted to raise our kids who are all World Cup and world level snowboarders, world-class snowboarders. We wanted to live in Steamboat Springs. I met my wife skiing in Vail. We wanted to raise our kids in the mountains. And to live in the mountains, you need to own your own company.
Yep.
So we started our own company in 1998, Sales Guys, which is morphed into the DBA Global Sales Guys. And my wife and I worked together. She was the fashion side of the family. And from connections on the snowboard side of the business, Redo Lamb, back in the Rad Air days, he was the marketing guy at Bogner. We helped Bogner introduce Fire and Ice. We started working with the Palmer Group, which was Sean Palmer, of course, but it was a Swiss-owned company, which owned a factory in Austria. And so those were a couple of our first brands that we brought into the portfolio. And I was really lucky, Mike. You probably hear me say a lot of time, right place, right time, introduced to the right people. Like if I was to sum up my entire career, that would be it. Right place, right time, right group of people.
Well, I would say, though, if you sum up your whole career, it's like you're always going to meet the right person from what I hear because you meet everyone. Like there's an aspect to you that's party Marty that everybody knows. And it's like you live a double life. It's like you're like the night owl that everybody wants to be around because you're the funnest guy in the room. But then during the day, you've got your little pocket planner. You're a business guy who gets everything done during the day and you never miss a beat. So it sounds like you're going to make all these connections. And we're going to talk about a lot of stuff you're going to talk about. I'm going to cut you off right now, though, because we're going to go to your youth. And while nobody needs to hear a ton about the childhood of a sales rep, it sounds like you're an Irish guy from Jersey. You ski race growing up. Your dad's a salesman. And was he a good salesman? Do you grow up with a lot of opportunity and money and don't have to worry about anything?
Thank you for that summary. Yes, I'm Irish. I'm from New Jersey. I actually have an Irish passport and Irish citizenship, which I'm super proud of. In Jersey, I couldn't be more proud of as well.
You moved right when you could, though, right?
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't move back, but growing up there gives you that confidence, I would say, East Coast Jersey confidence to take on anything. It's just kind of bred into you when you're from New Jersey. We're from a very modest family. My dad's a machinist, actually, by trade.
Oh.
And eventually my dad was tired of getting dirty and wanted to move into sales. And he moved into sales and he's been an independent rep 50 plus years now. He's in his 80s, young 80s, and he's still an independent rep.
Whoa. And now you have to buy from him because he's so old.
Maybe, but he's still crushing it. I think he did $2 million in sales a couple years ago when he was 79 years old.
Jesus.
And he represents machine parts. And my dad, he's still my mentor and has taught me everything in my life. And I've just kind of watched and learned from my dad through that osmosis. You can imagine he's very old school because he's old. And the basic principles of being old school. Yeah, I get grief a lot about still using a Franklin planner. But I have a Franklin planner now for 35 years. I could tell you where I was today, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, who I was with, how much money I spent, where I was in the world. And I kind of carried that through my entire team of 12 people here, still use that as our basic foundation, that old school sales values and processes and procedures. And
so do you have 10, 20 people that work for you that are in their 20s carrying a Franklin planner around writing in it?
We look like a bunch of Bible beaters. And my young team, it takes them a little while to adapt. I buy them when the day they start. and teach them how to use it and so on. But yes, the answer is yes. For the basic reasons of when you write something down, you remember it better. And when you're writing something down, you're telling the person that you're with that what they're talking about is important. And it is. That's why you're having that meeting. And third, you have a reference point to always go back to check your notes for whatever reason you might need them for. And so the modern technologies are insane, right? What you can do in today's world. But when I see kids sitting in meetings, the 20 somethings and everything else on their iPads or on their computers or on their iPhones, for me, they might as well all be playing Angry Birds or doing their email. But what they're not doing is they're not paying attention. And even if they are taking notes, there's distractions, right? So, there's been sales meetings we've been at where, I've seen some of my team taking notes on their computer and I can see they're taking notes on their computer, but I'll just close their computer and put their Franklin back in front of them.
They're like, thanks, Dad.
Yeah, thanks, Dad. Exactly, Mike. Exactly. But yeah, the Franklin Planner has been a big important of our culture and continues to be.
Well, with paying attention and when you're growing up, you went to Catholic school for your first 2 years of high school, but that didn't work out so well for you. I think they asked you to leave the Catholic school. And what were you like? What were you doing when you were younger?
You're digging deep there, Mike.
I got to.
I love it. Well, being a good Irish Catholic boy, I went to Catholic kindergarten. I went to Catholic grammar school and ultimately Catholic high school. I guess I wasn't the right fit for all the nuns and priests. So I did finish my senior year in public school in New Jersey. But growing up in that Catholic environment was incredible. And also, again, very disciplined. A few red knuckles here and there as a kid in Catholic grammar school, but great experience.
But what did they kick you out for? And how do your parents react to that? Because they can't be stoked.
I think that file's sealed, actually, of what I got kicked out for. But no, my parents were pretty upset, actually. My dad, as I mentioned, we came from a very modest family. He was working 2 or 3 jobs at that time to pay the tuition at a Catholic school. So it was definitely not a fun moment at home.
And this is back in the day when parents can hit you.
Of course. I think it was back in the day when if you don't spank your children, you should be spanked.
Now it's time to take a sponsor break. And for the first time ever, I'm going to lead with beer and start with the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. I always go on and on about how 10 Barrel's roots are found in the mountains, skiing, snowboarding, biking, and how their mantra is drinking beer outside. I mean, 10 Barrel creates tons of events, puts out ski and snowboard movies each year that are legit. They sponsor an A-list group of athletes and cool shit like this podcast. They have always stayed true to who they are, and they get it when it comes to action sports, and of course they make some amazing beers. So I want you to support the 10 Barrel Brewery, and to do that, it's pretty easy. Next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel and support the beer that supports you and me. You can find out more about all things 10 Barrel over at 10barrel.com. My next sponsor is Stanley, and your family has known them for over 100 years. They are the brand that invented the category of keeping beverages hot and cold. You may remember that green bottle that your grandpa kept his coffee in. Well, that's a Stanley, and they make so much more than that these days. I swear by the pint glasses and water bottles, and that's just the start of their product collection. For listening to this podcast, I'm going to save you 30% on all of Stanley's product collection. Here's what you need to do. Head on over to stanley-pmi.com, do some shopping, and when you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST, that's all lowercase, all one word, and you'll save 30%. Please buy something as Stanley is the best. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. It sounds like from the people I talked to, you'd kind of be the person that I would be hanging around with back in high school. And your senior year summer, like what kind of bands do you listen to? What kind of clique were you in? Who were you at that point in life?
I really fell in love with winter sports. I went to this tiny little hill with a, school class or whatever. Craigmere was called in New Jersey. It doesn't exist anymore. A little rope tow, and just got the bug. Totally got addicted to it, at a late age. I guess maybe a sophomore, bands and stuff like that. I was into Rush and Peter Frampton and, slept out for Rush concert tickets. And back then it was always a lot of fun to go to those types of concerts.
Were you drinking beer and smoking weed back then?
Yeah, not, yeah, for sure. For sure. We had, the fun Fred the Keg and, all those parties. And you could drive over to New York. The drinking age was lower than it was in New Jersey. But no, skiing really kind of sucked me in. And as soon as I got my license, every second I got, I was up at this tiny little resort called Sterling Forest. And Sterling Forest was this great little ski area. And, I eventually started teaching skiing there. I was inspired to ski race, but I'm living in New Jersey.
You got to go up north, right?
Yeah. So the second I graduated, I moved to Vermont. So I moved to Stratton and Bromley. I taught skiing at Bromley, waited tables at night. It was really fun. I lived in Manchester. That was about the time Burton was starting to emerge. They were based in Manchester. So all the guys we were on the hill with every day, half of them were on, the wooden boards, trying to run the same gates that we were running as ski racers on. So it was fun to kind of watch that and be friends with all those guys in the beginning of the snowboarding world. But I was really focused on trying to be a ski racer and had this dream to be a ski racer. But to be honest, I was never fast enough. But I pursued it through college, and it got me to college and through college, which also brought me to Steamboat Springs.
You go to Colorado Mountain College?
Yeah, and in Vermont, when I was only 17, 18 years old, a friend of mine that I skied with and trained with there, Mike McNeil, has asked me to bring him down to a trade show in Pennsylvania. So we jumped in the car and drove down from Vermont to Jack Frost Trade Show. And this is 1983. There's a gentleman named Rick Hodge who this guy Mike was an area representative for. And he did Caber boots and Spalding skis and CB goggles and Kerma poles. And I was just kind of a tag along. I stayed in the condo with him. I listened to all the sales meetings. I listened to all the presentations of the boots, the skis. And when it got busy at the booth over the next couple of days at the show, I just kind of started helping out. And they had a big ski race as part of the show. It's this fun event called the Calcutta, which we all raced in. And unbeknownst to me, all these guys I was working with were all ex-national team guys. And it was really fun and an incredible week. And at the end of the week, this guy, Rick Hodge, who's still a very dear friend and mentor, looked at me and said, "Hey, kid, you can keep the skis, you can keep the boots, you can keep the poles, you can keep the goggles. We won the race. Here's $500. Welcome to the ski business."
Whoa.
And I was just like, holy shit.
Yeah.
And so I went back to Vermont and I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing. And I still wanted to be a ski racer, but Rick really gave me this inspiration. And after Vermont, I was going back to spend the summer in Zermatt, Switzerland to ski race and train on my own, to just go spend the summer there so I could stay year round on snow. And I didn't speak German at that time. So I had a really hard time talking to the Swiss or the Austrians, everybody on the glacier to train. And I don't know, Mike, if you know Billy Kidd. He's a legendary ski racer. He won a silver medal back in the 60s, gold medal in world championships.
And he can out-party you.
I think he could probably, yeah. Anyway, long and short, Billy was on the glacier and I introduced myself to him. And he let me become part of his camp that he was there for 10 days. And over that time, Billy and I got to talk. And he was like, "Well, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm going back to Vermont to teach skiing and ski race. I want to be a ski racer." And he's like, "Hey, I started a school in Steamboat Springs for ski business. And it's at Colorado Mountain College. Would you be interested to go?" And I said, "Billy, I wasn't great in high school. And I was chasing the ski dream instead of the college dream." And he's like, "Well, here you could do both. You could race for the college. The Winter Sports Club in Steamboat has a great racing training program. You can coach for me part-time. Why don't you come to Steamboat?" So I came home early from Europe. My parents were like, thought something was wrong. They're like, "Is everything okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm moving to Colorado. I'm going to go to college." And my dad was like, "College?" He's like, "Are you going to CU?" And I'm like, "Well, no." "Are you going to DU?" I'm like, "No, I'm going to CMC." He's like, "CMC? Where's CMC?" I'm like, "Well, Steamboat Springs." And my dad looked at a map. He's like, "Steamboat Springs? There's no college there. That's a ski area." And I'm like, I go, "Yeah, but they got a college at the ski area." They teach all the ski industry, ski resort management, property management. And then Billy had helped be a founder of this ski business program, which was really a marketing degree, but how it applied to seasonal business. Because as you know, in the snowboard and winter sport and outdoor business, action sport business, it's all seasonal.
Yeah.
So it was very geared towards seasonal businesses is how I would kind of sum it up. So we called it See Me Ski because, if it snowed, we were on the hill or we were in class in our ski clothes to get on the hill as soon as class was over. But what a great experience. I got to ski race for the college. I got to ski race for the winter sports club. And I did an internship while I was at CMC with Hart Skis, who Billy had introduced me to because Billy skied for Hart Ski Company.
So when you go to Europe that year and you meet Billy, and that lays the path for the rest of your life because
Phenomenal. Yes.
you end up going to this school and, maybe it's a marketing class, maybe you get something out of it, maybe you don't. What it really does is it surrounds you with people in the industry that are all going to go do big things in the industry. So you're meeting a lot of people on the ground level and Billy that are going to create all these connections for you. And that's really the beauty of what Colorado did for you. But when you're there and ski racing, I hear you looked more like Jesus than anything else. Long beard, long hair. You're really scrawny like a beanpole and a really fast ski racer at that too.
Oh, Mike, I could only sum that up. The good old days, right?
Yeah.
And I wish I had half the hair today and was half the weight. My GS suit used to hang off of me and my hair was long below my shoulder blades and a big bushy red Irish beard. But yeah, it was incredible fun, that time in the 80s. And ski racing was fantastic. I got to meet some of my best friends and industry icons like Mike Rosen and Frank Province and Johan Malkowski and these great group of people over those years. But you're right, Billy, unbeknownst to me at that time, he opened door after door.
And Billy is pretty much you, but faster. I mean, he's a party, good times guy who loves to ski race, but yeah, he's just a better athlete than you.
Great human is the way to describe Billy Kidd. Just an incredible human. He still does his 1:00 ski runs with anybody that wants to show up every day on the Steamboat Mountain. He instilled discipline and passion. And Billy introduced me to Hart Skis as a sponsor for my ski racing in college. And then ultimately introduced me to this amazing gal, Betsy Conroy Knights, who Betsy took me around the world with her and took me under her wing as an intern. So I actually got credit for school and it was driving the van and it was tuning skis and setting up demos. And then it morphed into going to the Olympics. I traveled with Betsy to the first Winter Olympics for freestyle skiing. And when I graduated school, Jim Bjork, who owned Hart Ski Company, and Charlie Untenauer hired me. And it was my favorite job, Mike. I want to end my career this way. I was the van guy. I was the guy with the van full of skis. And I did Bozeman, Montana to Santa Fe, New Mexico. And it was incredible. I just went from resort to resort to resort and skied with the best local skiers and all the shop kids. And we sold Hart Skis and we were bringing products from Europe. We brought Reusch gloves from Europe and so on. And they really let me cut my teeth. Like I started as the van driver and a tech rep. I became a sales assistant to legendary reps like Bruce McKenzie, who, God bless him, he's not with us anymore, but he taught me a tremendous amount. Mark Harbo, who was a rep in Sun Valley. I worked under those guys. They introduced me to everyone. And then Charlie took me under his wing, the Swiss owner, and brought me to Europe and made me learn German. At that time, Hart Skis was being purchased by a big Japanese company called Alpen. And Alpen is still, you have to check my facts, but I think they're number 3 in the world in winter sports. They have about 400 stores in Japan.
Yep.
And they're massive. And the guys I met on the glacier in my 20s are the vice president and former president and the guys that I met and used to test skis with 35 years ago. Again, everyone I met through my young career are still lifelong friends.
When you think of all these people that still love you from 30 years later, it's not just because of meeting them on the hill though, right? Because you meet them on the hill, then you go out and party with them and they're like, holy shit, this guy's skiing circles around me and he's an awesome guy on the hill. Then at night, like, oh my God, this is the most fun guy in this town. And yeah, one night with you and they're going to remember you 30 years later. And is that how just your relationships have built over time?
Yeah, I think the skiing part for sure. And the most important part of it was the authenticity, right? I think that whether it's skiing or snowboarding, I think that how passionate I am about it and how important it is in my life and at every stage in my life and my career. I think that's really expressed in what we do and how we do it. We love spending time with our customers. Yes, whether that's on the hill or that's having a beer together.
I mean, in the 80s was the era of powder days and powder nights. I mean, were you aware of that?
Let's just say I'm very happy that in the 80s social media didn't exist.
Mm-hmm.
But what I love about the 80s was the passion and way the sport evolved and how snowboarding was introduced. It was just a great time to be alive and be in the business because it was a constant evolution. I'm sure the 70s was like that too. I didn't have the pleasure to live through that or experience that as a part of my career. But the 80s was a magnificent time to be part of our business. And that's when snowboarding really started to kind of get steam. And we brought a brand from Switzerland called Rad Air Snowboards. They're famous for their Rad Air tankers. Harry Gunz is kind of a legend in snowboarding. He's the godfather of snowboarding in Europe. I'd put him on the equivalents of the Jake and the Regis Rollins of Europe. You know, Harry was just a pioneer and leader and still is, you know, in snowboarding. And we started doing Rad Air Snowboards for the US through Hart Skis. And we were bringing Reusch gloves from Germany and Sport Arm clothing from Austria. So I didn't know it at the time, but I was learning through osmosis about bringing products from different parts of the world. We were super connected to the Japanese. The Japanese were producing a couple 100,000 pairs of skis. I was spending my summers in Austria. I spent my summers at Atomic and Head and Palais and the different factories working in product management. Those were back in the days when Romoser still owned Atomic. And nobody in the factory, including Romoser, spoke English.
Didn't you go to like an immersive German program for a few months?
I did. Yeah, I did. And actually, a lot of industry people had gone to it because it's based in Enschede, which is a little south of Munich. It's beautiful mountain town on the way to Garmisch. And that's where the Marker ski binding factory is located. So a lot of industry executives, in particular Marker guys that I had known, had gone there for a couple month immersion. I'm not fluent by any means, but enough to get by, you know, enough to get in trouble and work, you know. So then I was able to, for Hart, go and attend the ISPO shows because you'd have to present, you know, in German.
Yep.
And then when we started bringing Rad Air Snowboards to the US, that was kind of my introduction to snowboarding. And a good friend of mine from Steamboat Springs, Johan Malkowski, who runs Capita Union Coal, was starting the first snowboard shop, Powder Tools, which is now part of the old Christie's chain. Back then, Johan started it in Sports Stalker. So Johan was the only snowboarder that I knew. And Johan taught me how to snowboard and helped me, and Johan and I launched this Rad Air Snowboards in the US. And it was incredible, like Reto Lamb and Danny Kiwi Meyer and all these legends in the European snowboard community. You know, we were selling Reto's Pro Model, and he was the iconic snowboarder from Switzerland. And it was just really a fun time in snowboarding. And I really kind of then got the bug on the snowboard side. And at ISPO one year, I got to meet Rob and Neil Morrow, and they talked to me about coming to Oregon, and they had a new snowboard brand. And Dennis Shelton, who was the CEO at that time, had talked to some of his reps in Colorado and some of the other territories. And somehow I got recommended to these guys, unbeknownst to me. And so I had just recently got married. I married into twins. And my wife and twins and I moved to Salem, Oregon. Kind of left the ski business to go all in, you know, in the snowboard business.
And the ski business is dying a little bit at that point. I mean, snowboarding has gotten cool, and brands like Hart, who are known for bumps and freestyle, it seems like, at least to me at that point in life, they were kind of dying off. And you get them into snowboarding, I don't know how they were received, but with this Morrow job, it's not like you're leaving because it's time to leave Hart. It's just for a bigger opportunity at Morrow because they are on fire.
Couldn't describe it better myself. You know, Hart was family. And I went to 3 Winter Olympics with Hart, with the U.S. freestyle team and Betsy. So it was an incredible experience. I took a crew from the CBS crew into Atomic and in Austria and Dynamique in France for the Albertville Olympics to do a story on race room skis. So it was the first time ever a film crew was allowed in the race room. because race room skis are pretty special, compared to production skis.
Yep.
So Hart was just, when I look back on the 10 years I spent there, just incredible on so many levels. Hart was very lucky, and a lot of people don't know that still to today. They're one of the largest ski brands because Alpen still owns it. And for Alpen, it's a house brand. So they sell it within their 400 stores. So they still produce over 80,000 pairs of skis. But you're right. They were known for freestyle.
Like back then it was Steamboat was the hub. There's like Nelson Carmichael, Chris Feddersen, Trace Worthington, all that stuff was there. And you were there as well.
Yeah, you know them all. And yeah, you're exactly right. Steamboat was the hub. Hart was the brand that supported that hub. Winter Park was another one. After the Olympics in Calgary, where it was just kind of a test, then it continued to grow and grow a lot of momentum. And you're right. Snowboarding then in that late 80s, early 90s really started to take the wind out of the sails of just skiing in general, because Burton had done such a good job selling snowboarding to the resorts and everything else, not just selling Burton snowboards, but selling the sport. I think if you talk to an old Burton rep or sales manager or employee back in the day, they weren't selling product. They were selling the sport, because they had to convince the resorts to allow snowboarding, right? Before they could sell product. So it's really amazing what they did. And Morrow, Robbie and Neil, Robbie obviously is an athlete. Neil is an engineer. They had the tutelage of their father and uncle, Ray Morrow and Jim Morrow, and really, again, right place, right time. I was 29 years old. The only way I could describe it, it was like getting your MBA the fun way. We went from a garage to 32 million in sales. We took the company public with Smith Barney. I was senior vice president of global sales and marketing on the executive team that took it public.
Now it is time for my last sponsor break, and my final sponsor is Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. For over 60 years, they have been getting people on the snow, in the water, and on the pavement. Not only have they provided a great retail experience, they also play against the big internet guys. Over on their website, peterglenn.com, you'll find great brands, great products, and deals. Peter Glenn also offers shipping on orders over $49. They'll match the price found at other websites. If you need something ski, snowboard, wakeboard, or inline skate related, head on over to peterglenn.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. Who gets rich when it goes public? I mean, do you own a little piece at all?
I wish. Of course, yeah, we had some stock options, but I didn't know anything at that time.
Morrow brothers get rich?
I think the Morrows did really well. A lot of the shareholders did well. Smith Barney did really well. The stock did really well out of the chute.
And then it just died.
Yeah, a few years into it. When I left, it was about 32 million in sales, and I think EBITDA was about 3 million. And then the bottom fell out in Japan. And, like I said, I moved back home to Steamboat in 98, which was purely lifestyle driven to move back to Colorado. And we loved Oregon, and we were weekend warriors at Mount Bachelor. And think about my kids learning to snowboard, right? They're twins at 8 years old. And who are they learning from? Rob Morrow and Josh Dirksen and Billy Anderson and Todd Richards. And we're working with Trevor Graves. Trevor is my marketing director. Trevor and I were connected at the hip. I mean, Nemo Design, we created it at Morrow. So it was just a fun time to be alive and in the snowboard business. It was when all the Trans World conferences were, and you couldn't do anything wrong. Snowboarding was just sideways. But we were number 2 to Burton, at that time.
Which is insane.
It was insane. And we were doing things different. Morrow wasn't going the way of everyone else. And that's where the uncles came in. Everything was built with composites and unique proprietary technology. And it was an uphill battle for a lot of things because snowboarding then was all about simplicity, and wood cores are better than composite cores. And Trevor and his team, still today, I think half his team is those original Morrow guys, his partner Jeff and everyone else, were just marketing geniuses.
Yep.
And Neil and Robbie were building incredible products. And Trevor and Robbie were building an incredible team and the authenticity. So for me as a sales guy, it made my job really easy. Globally, the trend was going nuts in Japan. I had a good experience with Japanese from my Hart days. So our partner in Japan, who is still one of my best friends and a partner still today, we still work together with a lot of the same brands, Hosco. which was the biggest distributor in Japan, one of the biggest in action sports. They were Sims back in the day, and then Morrow. And Shige Obata, who's the president of Hosco, we just kind of grew up in the business together. He stayed at my house in Salem, Oregon. We raced motocross together. Morrow started this whole, I don't know if you knew it, Mike, this whole fun Morrow motocross.
No, I had no idea.
It was amazing. So all the pro motocross guys and all the freestyle motocross guys would come up to Salem, and all the pro snowboarders would come. Sean Palmer, Jamie Lynn, everybody rode motocross. And then all the industry guys, all the sales managers, Kirk Zach, everybody rode motorcycles, right? In Salem, we had a big supercross track, and everybody we worked with, Robbie had a motocross track at his house. So yeah, Trevor raced motocross. All our sales guys raced motocross. We had a sales manager class. We had an industry beginner class at our Morrow motocross just for all the other sales managers, which I probably got third in one year. So it was super fun time. And that instilled moto into myself and my kids for the rest of our lives. And we were every weekend at Mount Bachelor when I wasn't traveling, snowboarding, with Jim Morrow and all the athletes. And yeah, it just was literally growing up in snowboarding. I was 29 when I joined, 33 when I left. I was on a plane more than I was home. And ultimately, that was a big driver for our move back to Colorado, because we had our youngest daughter, Maggie Rose, who hopefully will be in the Olympics here in 2 years in Beijing. She's an alpine snowboarder.
Don't see many of those these days.
No. And she grew up in all disciplines. And like her brother and sister, her brother Lex was junior world champion when he was 16, all disciplines of snowboarding. Tori was on the U.S. snowboard team, our daughter, for multiple years. She broke her back right before the Olympics in Salt Lake, but continued on her snowboarding career. But our youngest had scoliosis, where your back goes crooked. Curves. So she had to get the surgery. And at that time, they told her she'd never snowboard again. She was devastated because, she just looked up to her older brother and sister, and snowboarding was her life. And I was working for Palmer Snowboards at that time. And Hans-Jörg Kessler, who's a legend in the snowboard business, he owns Kessler Snowboards, which is all the race boards for all the top World Cup guys. But he was doing all the shapes for Palmer, Hans-Jörg Kessler. That's why Palmer was so good and won all the border cross events and everything else. But anyway, long and short, Hans-Jörg sent me home with an alpine snowboard from Switzerland for Maggie after her scoliosis surgery and said, hey, she might not be able to ride half pipe anymore or border cross or do the tricks that she used to be able to do, because of her back, because she's got two 14-inch rods in her back. But for alpine snowboarding, keeping your back straight's actually an advantage. And so she got into alpine snowboarding really for fun, but she got really quite good at it. And so she's top 40 in the world now. And we hope she continues and loves it. And it keeps her traveling around the world and doing a lot of stuff that I got to do when I was younger, which is pretty neat.
We hope she doesn't do any stuff that you did when you were younger that happened after midnight, all right?
That's fair enough. That's fair enough, Mike. Fair enough. But when she was born, my wife said to me, I don't mind if you travel around the world. You love what you do and you're good at what you do and you have to do what you do. But I want to live back in the mountains. We want to raise the kids in the mountains. And we were living in Salem, Oregon. I think if we lived in Bend, we'd still be in Oregon. And we decided to move back to Steamboat Springs and start our own company 22 years ago. And again, kind of looking back, hindsight's always 2020, but because I'd been in the ski business for 10 years and then recently in the snowboard business with Morrow, one of the most prominent brands in snowboarding, through an epic time of growth in snowboarding, we were in a really rare position because there was a line in the sand, like you were a snowboard guy or you were a ski guy.
Yep.
Even for brands, right? Which is why the ski brands struggled so hard in snowboarding, because they weren't snowboard brands. And then they started buying all the snowboard brands. So when we started our own business, my wife had come from the fashion side. She had worked in fashion stores and ran a little fashion store in Steamboat. So we had permission as an agency to do products on the alpine side, to do products on the snowboard side, to do products on the apparel side, to do products on the accessory side. So we were really lucky from experiences to start our agency 22 years ago. and be on multiple sides of the fence. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you look at it back then, Mike Rosen was a ski guy. He was going to get K2 skis, but you could have a ski brand and a snowboard brand because you're respected in both worlds. There's not many people that are because you're respected in both worlds because you worked for Morrow when they were core and when they were corporate. You worked with Palmer, and you're reputable in the snowboard world, and the ski world, people don't give a fuck. Only snowboarders care.
Exactly. I love that. So it was great fun. And we were working for Palmer. I had met Palmer when I worked at Morrow because they had opened a factory in Austria and they heard we were looking for production in Europe. So I actually visited their factory in Austria and I met the Swiss owners. And then we started at Palmer bringing new brands to the market to help offset expenses, which led us into our business model of today. So we brought level gloves from Italy, which were iconic in both ski racing and snowboarding. Mauro Campagnoni and Davide Campagnoni. Mauro used to run some of the first snowboard contests and judge the first snowboard contest in Breckenridge back in the day. And Davide was on the Italian World Cup team with Tamba. So they had credibility on both sides.
Yeah.
We brought SP bindings from Austria. So we put a really cool little portfolio of products together to bring here to the US to help offset the expenses as we ran Palmer snowboards.
And does Palmer have when I think about that, you said Harry Gunst ran the program and Palmer was like the face. Did he have any risk or was it all someone else's money and he just got royalty?
Two separate topics. Harry Gunst is Rad
Air, that's right.
Which he still owns today. That's what Johan and I introduced before I worked for Morrow. Palmer came years later. To your question about Sean was the athlete at that time. So Sean was winning everything, right? Yep. He was the iconic poster child for X Games. Border cross was insane, right? Mm-hmm. So we had a giant border cross team. Palmer was the head of the team.
Yep.
And it was head to toe Swatch and Dainese and everything else. And then the ownership group for Palmer was Swiss. And Palmer and the Palmer team was the face of the brand.
Okay.
And then the Swiss guys opened a factory in Austria. State of the art. So back then, Mike, everybody laughed at us. They're like, you're never going to sell $900 snowboards, honeycomb snowboards, or titanium snowboards.
Yeah.
Because the average snowboard back then was $200, $199. Even Burton, everybody, even K2, everybody was like, no way. And we did, it was an amazing run because the technology was so good and the product was so good.
You could feel those honeycomb boards. You could feel the difference in weight. I was selling them I was working at Buzz's in Vail.
Ah, yeah, cool.
We sold a lot of them. You could feel the difference. But yeah, it was a much more expensive board. And you guys were able to pull it off. But there was no athlete like Palmer at that time. The self-proclaimed best athlete in the entire world. Yeah, he was a difference maker, I feel like.
Absolutely amazing. One of the funnest times, Bob Klein, who was one of the original OGs of the Burton team, professional snowboarder himself, an agent to all the rock stars of snowboarding, was running Palmer Snowboards. And so I got to work with Bob. And Bob was having one of his daughters at the time. And so he asked me to go to Crested Butte and be with Sean for one of the X Games. And my job with Sean was just to make sure he got everywhere he needed to go. And at that time, he was skiing and snowboarding. So ESPN gave me a snowmobile and we had a hut. And Sean would do his qualifying for skiing, jump on the snowmobile, go change into his outfit for snowboarding, take him over to the snowboard venue on the snowmobile, do his qualifying for snowboarding, go back, change, go back up to the skiing, right? And mind you, this is his first debut in skiing. And he's kicking ass on all these Olympic skiers, right? And still kicking ass on the snowboard side. And then he's in the finals for skiing and his ski tip gets caught in the carpet on the gate, like the start gate or whatever. Yep. He ends up still like fourth out of the heat or whatever. And they're like, hey, you can get another run if you want, and he's like, no, I don't have time. I got to go win the snowboard contest. and so then you zip him over there for the snowboard contest. And then a day later, he's doing the snowmobiling. So, like I said, poster child for X Games really doesn't describe who he was as an athlete and icon at that time. And the whole border cross thing and like honeycomb boards and the titanium boards. So it was all backed up with great product. And we started bringing retailers to Europe. So we would bring retailers to the factory in Austria. And then we would bring them to Dainese in Italy, which was where all the protection was, back protection and elbow protection and helmets and all that. And then we'd bring them to the Swatch factory in Switzerland.
Blow their minds.
Blow their minds, like snowboard and just immerse in the world. And when you saw how those boards were made, you knew that they were $900 boards, right? Or $800 boards. Again, coming back to specialty retail, which is the common denominator in my entire career. Specialty retailers need to make money. It's not about margin. It's about gross profit contribution, GPC. So gross profit contribution on a $900 board, you're making $450.
Yep.
Right? So you got to sell 10 K2s to equal the same amount of gross profit contribution. So it didn't take the specialty retailer long to say, I like selling $900 snowboards, or $600 snowboards. So we built these things called Palmer Profit Centers, which were only 15 decks or so. So there wasn't a big buy-in, but then it had all the border cross gear from Dainese. It had even some Swatch watches. It had the helmets, co-branded with Palmer. So it was a little sales center inside the shops. And to be honest, it was really kind of a little pioneer to building shop-in-shops, at least in our space.
Yeah.
Because when you'd walk into the store, there'd be this little Palmer Profit Center right front and center. And that didn't excite the Burton reps, because they're like, wait a minute, you only buy 20 grand from these guys. You buy 200 grand from us. You give these guys beachfront real estate in the front of your store. How come? Well, because it's new, it's different, it's exciting, and I make $450 every time I sell a board.
Yeah.
So it was special. During that time, there was a steamboat gentleman that I'd never see in Steamboat, but I'd always run into him in Japan or in Europe at ISPO or just traveling on planes. We never saw each other in Steamboat. And that was Gary Hammerslag. And Gary, you probably know, is the founder of BOA.
Yep.
And Gary came to me at that time and said, hey, I got this new project and we started in snowboarding, but I want to bring it outside of snowboarding. Would you be interested in coming to work for us? And I wasn't really interested to leave Palmer, but it was intriguing, what is this BOA guy up to? And it was in Steamboat Springs because that's where he started. So I had a breakfast with Gary and I looked at him and I said, all right, Gary, I only have one question. It's not about the money. It's not about the stock options. It's not about healthcare or whatever. I'm like, what's your vision for this thing? And he looked at me and he's like, that's a really good question. He goes, I want to replace shoelaces. And I'm like, you want to do what? And he's like, I want to replace shoelaces. And I'm like, I'm in. And it was a really interesting time. So all of a sudden, I came into this business and K2 and Vans, of course, were big customers and the first customers. But what BOA was doing at that time is they were selling the product to the factories and the factories were selling it to whoever they wanted to. There were like 60 brands, like all these licensees and bullshit brands from the 80s that were buying BOA technology from the Chinese factories. And they were putting it on cheaper boots and, they were just trying to bring product to market. And it was really hurting K2 and Vans, who were the first customers of BOA.
Yeah, they wanted to have something unique.
Yeah, so my first job as the VP of sales and marketing at BOA was to be sales prevention. So I actually started cutting customers. And the CEO goes, no. We hired you to sell more, not to sell less. And I said, we have to sell less to sell more. And nobody understood that, right? Because I was one of 20 people, but I was the only sales and marketing guy. Everybody else was an engineer. In every meeting, I was yin and they were yang. They're engineers.
So it's a constant battle.
Battle, which turned into education for me, right? But yes, battle, but then it turned into education. So what we did was we cut back every major brand and then rebuild our business with K2 and Vans, which we did very successfully. Then a few select partners, DC and, a few other brands. But we cut our sales dramatically. But then our sales regrew with those brands. But what we did was we took that business model And I said to the team, when we go into any other category, we sell the product to the factory, but we work with the brand. And so we're partners with the brand. So I wrote the sales and business plan for each category. And we went into hockey, and we went into outdoor footwear with the North Face, and we went into golf with FootJoy, and we went into bike with Specialized. But we only went with the best of each category as we entered.
Yep.
For me, it was a really interesting sales process because the product guys were easy to convince. They wanted new inventions. They needed new technologies, but they weren't the decision makers, right? To sell BOA into a company like FootJoy or to North Face or to Nike or to any of these companies, you had to convince every stakeholder. So I'm in a room with the CEO, the CFO, the CMO, the VP of sales, and the product guys, right?
Yeah.
All different age groups, all different demographics, all different interests, all different priorities. And, the sales guys were the hardest guys to convince because at the end, they knew they were accountable if it didn't sell, right? Like if they put it on a shoe. No matter if everyone else was involved in the decision, they're the ones that are going to get shot, right? So now it's truly a closure system. You find it on helmets, you find it on medical equipment and all these different products. But Gary's original vision was to replace shoelaces. So that was our pitch to all these footwear companies. And I was in the R&D department at Nike. There's very few people that have been in the R&D department at Nike. It opened a whole new world to me. And it was a licensing model. As you know, there's very few in our space. The Gore-Texes of the world, the Vibrams of the world, the BOAs of the world. So it was a whole new level of experience. But the biggest takeaway was what you asked me about earlier was the battle, because Gary and his team were engineers and they made me run sales like an engineer. So they wanted me to report sales like an engineer. And engineering is like learning German. It's a different language. So I had to learn how to communicate sales in the engineering language. So they made me do a sales process and pipeline like an engineer. So I spoke in their language. And it's what allows me to do what I do today. Because the only way to introduce new brands to the market is to really have a disciplined process like an engineer that you go through consistently. And that's what I learned at BOA. And unfortunately at BOA, it didn't end well for me because the president at the time wanted sales and marketing to be in Denver. And I didn't want to be in Denver. So I fought it and I wasn't part of the move, right? So I was fired. And probably, Mike, the lowest time of my life. Up to then, everything was just on this trajectory that was just insane. I had some stock because I was early in the deal, which didn't end well either. But for me, it was a devastating time in my life. It was 11 years ago, almost 12 years ago. It was 2008, 2009. And that was when a shitty time to lose your job, right?
Yeah.
And I come home after being fired and look at my wife and 3 kids. And I'm in Steamboat Springs and I was in a very nice 6-figure job. And like I told you before, those jobs don't exist in Steamboat Springs. So for me, I'm like, what the hell do I do now? Here I am at that crossroads again in my life. And my daughter, I mentioned earlier, had scoliosis. So she had just had her scoliosis surgery. So it wasn't the time to lose healthcare.
Yep.
And so, my wife and I were like, oh shit, what do we do now? And of course, I started the job hunt, but we want to stay in Steamboat, protect our lifestyle, raise our kids in the mountains, protect their lifestyle. What do we do? So it was an interesting time. And Danny Cass gave me an opportunity to be a Western sales manager for him. So Kurt Schumann was managing the East Coast and Danny asked me if I'd manage the West Coast. So I was kind of like, this is interesting. And Grenade was going through kind of their rebuilding and Danny's a Jersey guy and friend and legend in the business. And I said, well, can I do other stuff? If I'm working for you as a contractor and I'm not the sales manager for the entire US, yeah, you can do whatever else you want. And so that kind of light bulb went on. And I was like, maybe there's an opportunity here. There's a lot of smaller brands that need sales horsepower, but they can't afford that VP of sales or they can't afford the senior sales manager. They don't have the capital, but they need that type of individual to help them go to the next level. So what if I work for 3 or 4 smaller brands, at a reduced salary that I would normally get for working for a bigger brand, and then I get to the same end result? Because I had to figure out how to pay for everything.
Yeah.
Right? You have 3 kids at home and school and a wife.
And it makes sense with your background and your relationships. It's like, that's what you're supposed to be doing. It just took BOA firing you being in a shitty place to realize that your skills are your relationships that you've built for 30 years, and you can go maximize that with the brands and what you're doing with sales guys.
100% fast forward to today. It was the worst experience you go through as a human. So for me, it was devastating on a personal level, on a professional level, emotionally. But you pick yourself back up by the bootstraps and you're like, fuck this. I'm going to do this and I'm going to kick ass. And you're right. All of those people over 30 years that I had met started reaching out and started throwing me bones and started like, hey, Marty, talk to this guy. Hey, do this. And the funniest story I can tell you is I'm just trying to find products, right? And before Danny, I'm like, all right, if I'm going to live in Steamboat, I got to consult and coach and find some brands. I was still on the board of SIA. So I was on the board of directors for SIA, and I had to go that spring to a SIA board meeting with Gumby and, all these legends in the business that were all helping me,
Yep.
So I'm like, I got to go to this board meeting. And my wife's like, you're buying a plane ticket to go to Florida, and spend money out of your own pocket when you don't have a job. I'm like, no, I got to go to this meeting and network and everything else. And it was NSAA when they combined their ski area meetings with the SIA meetings.
Yep.
And it was Marco Island, Florida. And prior to that meeting, I was talking to this brand out of Switzerland called Go Ski. They make this little sled. Those crazy cats over there, they ride those little stupid sleds all over the mountain.
The Swiss Bob kind of sleds?
Yeah, where they put between your legs.
Yeah, it's like you sit on it.
You sit on it. I don't even know how they got my name and said, hey, would you help us launch our sled in the U.S.? I said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm going to this trade show in a month. It's in Florida, but the trade show is for the resorts. And if anybody's going to buy this, the resorts will buy it and put it in their rental fleet or maybe make it an activity at their resorts. I kind of knew in the back of my mind, no way, legally, people will sue you like crazy, when you're the first guy that gets killed on one of these. But, I needed work.
Not your problem.
I need a customer. So anyway, I go to Florida. We got a little booth set up because it's an NSAA trade show for all the stuff resorts buy.
Mm-hmm.
Upstairs in the resort is the SIA board meeting. So my older daughter, Tori, I'm like, Tori, you got to go with me because I need somebody to do the booth downstairs while I'm, upstairs at the board meeting. So anyway, she comes and, we do the thing and we're showing these sleds. And of course, the only question is liability, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, one night, I think a second or third night there, Tori after dinner looks at me and she's crying. And I'm like, what's wrong? And she looks at me and she goes, what's wrong with you? I go, what do you mean? She goes, you used to be the vice president of Hart Skis and traveling around the world. And you were vice president of Morrow Snowboards and traveling around the world. And you were vice president of BOA Technology and traveling around the world. And now you're in Florida selling fucking sleds that nobody wants. and I was just like looking at her and I go, well, now that you put it like that, I'm going to start crying too. Yeah. and I said, you know what, Tori, you got to start somewhere. I'm like, you just got to get going. Momentum creates momentum. And I'm like, this is our first one, and then our next one, and then Danny Cass came to me and then we had Siege Audio. And then the Zoomies guys gave me a break and bought Siege. And it just was like one thing, led to another. But then we were doing all these startup companies. It was fun and we always had something new and people loved that we were always bringing them something new. And so all of a sudden we're kind of watching the market, watching our European friends, and we watched the distributor get squeezed out of the game because global pricing on the internet, people aren't going to pay more for your Apple Watch or Apple computer or whatever it is. You pay the same price in Tokyo, New York, LA, Portland, Salt Lake, Denver, Zurich. So global pricing changed the world for consumers, right? So global pricing set a bar. And then the retailers, the specialty retail, who's our core engine, they need to make more money. 40% margin's not enough. They need to make 50 or 55 or 60 margins. So they're putting more pressure on the brands. And then the brands are faced with rising costs. So I'm just watching this, and then I'm watching the whole EU come as one unit in Europe, and everybody getting rid of all the distributors and starting to sell direct. So every good idea I have, Mike, comes from my wife, Tammy. Her idea, because she used to go to fashion houses in LA, and she's like, why don't you do it like a fashion house? And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, get a group of brands. She's like, you know how to do that, and we'll share the cost across all those brands. There's thousands of brands out there in the outdoor action and winter space that need to be in the North American market that have no access to it. And so we see this opportunity. And the big break for us was Jerome Boulet, who's working with me now 11 years, also a legend in the snowboard business, ran Nidecker for years. Jerome runs a lodge down in Chile where all the pro snowboarders go and all the pro athletes go. And he called me from Chile, and he's like, hey, man, these French snowboarders just showed up at my lodge. He's like, they're wearing this brand called Picture. He's like, let's check it out, right? So I call some guys in France, our shop friends. What do you know about this brand? You know, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, Marty, you need to meet these guys, get an introduction. So Julian, the owner of Picture, comes and meets Jerome and I. We're at a snowboard meeting. Gumby and Johan had connected me with Deluxe. And so we were at the sales meeting in Chamonix with Capita Union called Deluxe. And then Julian, the owner of Picture, came up to Chamonix to meet me and Jerome and go snowboarding with us. That was in 2010. And it took us 2 years of talking together to convince Julian and his board of directors that our business model was unique and different, but that's why he should introduce his brand with us in the US. And they were growing in Europe quite fast. But anyway, we went snowboarding with Julian. We took 2 years. And in June of 2012, we signed a deal with Picture. And that was really pivotal for us because up till then, we were doing a lot of startup brands. And it was fun and it was good, but you had to replace them as soon as you'd lose one. So we always had one going out, one coming in, or two going out, two coming in. And they never didn't pay us because they didn't want to pay us. They didn't pay us because they couldn't pay us, right? Because they were startups and they ran out of money. So we saw this trend, and Picture was the first brand that was a really successful brand in another part of the world, but it was a startup here in the US. Picture was pivotal for us and continues to be. It's our anchor brand. It's a brand I'll work with for the rest of my life, and I'm proud to be a part of it. But anyway, for sales guys, what it taught me and Jerome, and we hired our first full-time employee, and we moved to Denver. So that's what I meant when I didn't make the move with BOA. Unbeknownst to me, 3 years later, I'd be in Denver.
Yeah.
Because we felt with Picture, it was important. All the dealers were coming to Denver, and we found a space with some old snowboard guys at Battery 621 and finding brands from different parts of the world that were already successful brands, but they were all startups here in the US, restarting in the US, a relaunch. Or
you're taking cool shit that exists elsewhere and bringing it to the US so we can see the cool shit and buy it here, which makes sense. And it's already proven to be successful elsewhere, so you know it's going to be a winner. It just has to be launched right in this market. This seems like what you've been doing.
You nailed it. You nailed it. And it takes 3-5 years minimum just to start getting traction. And then year 4 or 5, if it's going to go. Now, year 7, you start to see what's going, on a different level.
Yeah, I mean, these are all the long game.
Exactly.
You're not trying to get rich over one product line. It's like you're building trust in the consumer. So that's how you've built the sales guys into what they are. But at this point, I have something that I like to call inappropriate questions. And what I do is I get somebody that you know to ask 3 inappropriate questions. And based on all my notes, you've been very guarded on a lot of your answers here today, which is totally fine, as you should be. But hopefully these inappropriate questions will make you less guarded. I talked to Mike Rosen, who is a friend of yours forever. You know him from the East Coast. You helped start him in the business by giving him a job with Hart, I think, or Roosh or someone.
I never liked him, Mike.
You loved him.
I was in his wedding.
So, yes, you do love him. We'll give your first inappropriate question from one of the reps of the year of 2000. I can't remember, Mike Rosen.
When we were in college, there was a season where all of a sudden you became incredibly slow as a ski racer. And there was a real specific reason, if I remember. Can you explain how you went from being one of the fastest guys on the team to almost being kicked off?
I'm sure he already told you the answer, Mike.
I have no idea what this answer is.
I love it. Well, there was a year I got in a bet with all my roommates from Steamboat and party friends. We were playing poker one night and somebody at the table said, "Oh, I quit drinking." I said, "Oh, you want a beer?" And they said, "No, I quit drinking." "How long did you quit drinking for?" I said, "Oh, I quit drinking for 2 weeks." I said, 2 weeks, why would you quit drinking for 2 weeks? If you're going to quit drinking, you got to quit for 6 months. And everybody at the table is like, who's going to quit drinking for 6 months? Nobody could quit drinking for 6 months. And of course, we're betting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Playing poker on our Friday night after we all got paid. And I said, I could quit drinking for 6 months. And everybody at the table said, no fucking way. I opened my big mouth and said, want to bet? Everyone at the table said, yep, we do. It quickly got to like $1,000. And then for fun, even Betsy Conroy Knights, who I was working for as an intern for Hart Skis at that time and traveling with Betsy, right? So I wasn't going to be at home in Steamboat all the time where my friends could watch me. Even Betsy got in on the bet and it killed my skiing. I don't know why, Mike. Like I was stronger, smarter, more sleep, focused. My skiing was a disaster. I couldn't even make it in the top 10. The joke was when I finally won the bet, which I did win the bet, and went back to ski racing, my results changed significantly. and so maybe it's just kind of not that stress or tense or whatever. But
Party Marty needs to party.
Party Marty wasn't a nickname. I had plenty of nicknames. But Party Marty definitely wasn't because it rhymed,
All right. So we will go with his second inappropriate question.
Where is the strangest place you have ever ordered surf and turf? And why would you have ordered it there?
Oh, my God, Rosen. It was, let me reflect, Wyoming, driving across the country. Mike, when he was in college, had interned with Spider. And then when he graduated college, I was already working for Hart Skis. So I helped Mike get a job at Hart Skis. Mike got the job and Mike was moving to Lake Tahoe.
Okay.
And so I was driving Mike in the Hart van to California. And there's nothing in Laramie, Wyoming. And we stopped at some shitty ass truck stop or whatever. And I ordered surf and turf. And Rosen looked at me and he's like, we're in fucking Wyoming. What are you ordering surf and turf? I'm like, well, because you can. It's on the menu, And Rosen was just like, what the fuck is wrong? So ever since that moment, I don't think there's been a single dinner that I don't order surf and turf if I'm with Rosen.
All right. Now we will jump into his final inappropriate question.
Your van, when you were a tech rep, was affectionately known as the Deer Slayer. Why and how many?
Oh, fun stuff. Trying to make sure my insurance people won't listen to this, Mike.
No, only like 2 people are going to hear it. You don't need to worry about a thing.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know why I was like a magnet to deer. Well, I do know why, because I was driving a gazillion miles. My territory, I think I told you earlier, was Bozeman, Montana to Santa Fe, New Mexico.
Yeah, I didn't think it was real deer. I thought they were using that term to describe something else, and that's why I was asking how many. You're talking about you hit a lot of deer.
No, it's for real. And I wrecked multiple vans. I mean, totaled multiple vans. I've hit deer in the oddest of places. I hit one in Salt Lake City, actually, in the city, like on the way up. Who hits a deer in Salt Lake City? Between Steamboat and Valley, it's like a deer farm, right?
Sure.
So it's a matter of time there. But I mean, I hit deer all around the country. One big one, the rep I worked for, Mark Harbaugh from Sun Valley, whenever I'd leave Sun Valley to drive up to Big Sky or Bozeman, he told me, do not drive through Yellowstone Park at night. Like, you stay at this Super 8 motel and do not drive through the park at night. We were trying to meet our friends in Bozeman from the ski shop. for last call in Bozeman, driving up from Sun Valley. And it was 30 below and snowing. And we get to West Yellowstone, and I had a friend driving with me. And I'm like, hey, my boss said we always stay at this Super 8 motel. And I always did. And he's like, fuck that. We got to make last call in Bozeman and see our buddies and blah, blah, blah. So we pressed on, and I hit the biggest elk you've ever seen in the middle of nowhere in the park, like 30 miles from Bozeman and 30 miles from West Yellowstone, and totaled the Hart van. And it's 30 below and almost went into the Gallatin River. All of a sudden, out of the mist comes some guy in a pickup that was coming down from Bozeman. He was some hunter, and he tied us to his truck, and he towed us all the way back into West Yellowstone.
Whoa.
Yeah, and thank God we didn't die, because we would have froze to death out there for sure. But the people I worked for, it got to be so bad that I was hitting so many deer and wrecking so many vans. When they relogoed the van Deer Slayer. And they put that on the back door. And Bruce McKenzie, who I worked for, he put Deer Slayer on the back door, and then he put them like kills on a fighter plane, like on the front corner panel.
Yeah.
Well, then there was the Deer Slayer 2, because I wrecked that van, and then there was the Deer Slayer 3.
Whoa.
And I was at a demo in Keystone one time, and some animal activist came up behind me and said, I don't think that's funny, because she saw Deer Slayer 2 on the back of my van and all the dead deers with circle slashes through them. And I go, my insurance company don't think it's funny either, And how I didn't get fired for wrecking so many vans, I think was because everybody embraced it.
Well, it's because you're you.
Maybe.
I don't think everybody can pull it off. And I'm going to cut you off because you're a sales rep that can talk to me for another hour about the answer to this question. But Marty, I want to thank you a ton for your time. I mean, hearing your career, it's just like a history lesson in sales and the stuff you don't really hear from people, because no one talks about sales on much stuff, because we talk about athletes and brands more so than anything. But behind the scenes, the sales guys are what make brands happen, and they are very needed. And it seems like you're doing it a little bit differently than everybody else, and it's been working well for you. And I thank you for your time, my man.
Mike, I couldn't thank you more. And you know what, I'm proud, and it's a privilege to be part of your podcast, and any way I can support it going forward as well, let me know. And yeah, I'd love to see more industry people. I love what you do with athletes and all that, but mine's one of, I think, many stories. There's a lot of great people out there and a lot of great stories. And I couldn't thank you enough for being a part of this, Mike. Thanks a million.
So that was time with Marty Carrigan. And with this interview, like with some others I've had lately, I've had some questions that I refrained from asking. Marty was talking so much that I knew each additional question I would ask, I would get like a 20-minute response, and I wasn't having that. So I'll ask someone else those questions. But Marty is the man. He has had a dream career in skiing. He is killing it as a rep. He's kind of taking a page from the past with his notebooks and redefining how the rep groups are going to look as he moves to the future. So that was time with Marty Carrigan, and that's the podcast for this week. I want to thank you for listening. I want to ask you to rate or review me. To do so, all you need to do is click the podcast icon on your iPhone, search for the Powell Movement. Even if you subscribe, you will need to do it this way. So when you search, you'll see my logo, then you're going to click on it. You'll scroll down to where you see the 5 stars, give me a 5-star review, and you're done. It takes a minute, and whether it helps the show grow or not, I'm not really sure, but it does make me feel good, so please do that for me. I also want to thank my amazing sponsors who make the podcast happen: Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.